So we good? All right, we're going to continue with our general knowledge training this morning. Yesterday we covered the Pledge of Allegiance, the Star Spangled Banner, and the prayer. We're going to pick up today with the 7 days of the week. And again, we have a very specific way that we want this taught, and we'd like it taught the same way from classroom to classroom, year to year, age to age. And so when we say the 7 days of the week, we actually start off by starting with the title, and we say the 7 days of the week are, and we emphasize that word are because being verbs, as I've said, are hard for children to pick up on, and we want to make sure that they have it. Also, by teaching them the title, the 7 days of the week, when we ask them how many days are in a week, the number, it's just automatically there. It's part of that knowledge. We don't have to teach that as a separate fact. It's just become part of the rhythm. I know there are a lot of really good songs out there about the days of the week, but we don't want the children to have to stop and sing a song to get through it to know what day comes next. If you're 40 years old, you don't want to have to stop and think Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Oh, tomorrow's Friday. Yay. You want you just to know that after Thursday comes Friday. And so we're going to memorize those days of the week in just a regular tone of voice before we teach songs about it. And once they've learned the days of the week, you can introduce songs. That's great. But first, we're going to learn the days of the week. So when we say them, we're going to start off with learning this. The 7 days of the week are. And you'll just stop right there. You won't actually even introduce the days of the week to start. And you can see here that I have got a sheet of paper. It's actually one of the months of the year turned backwards, so it's just white. But it's covering up the part that we're not doing. And usually on your board, that's exactly what you're going to want to do. You're only going to want to show the part that you're working on right now so that they can look at it and they can learn to associate this visual cue with the statement that goes along with it. I know they can't read. We're not putting up words because we expect them to read them, but the look of those words, they become a visual cue. In fact, so much that sometimes you'll have children who are starting to understand the concept of the days of the week, but don't quite have the words down. They will refer to the day of the week by the color on their color chart. So they'll talk about on the purple day, we're going to do this. Or on the yellow day, we get to go to church. Or on the green day, we're going to get to have ice cream. And that's fine. They're associating that passage of time. They're learning to put those together. They'll put the name with the day eventually. But it's fine for them to start to understand what a day is and how we can use that to predict what's going to happen in the future. And so we'll start off with just simply the 7 days of the week are, and then you'll move on. We do not introduce the months of the year at all until every child knows the 7 days of the week. You will not even touch this until they can all say the days of the week. And the reason is that every year we have a group that moves on too quickly. And when we go in kindergarten to test whether or not the children know the days of the week as they're coming in, they'll say Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, October, November, December. Or actually, usually it's because they don't know all of those names. And that's just a sign that it was introduced too quickly. It was put in there together and it ended up all mixed up, just like Cody with his prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance, all tangled up in their brain. And when that gets introduced into their brain and gets tangled up like that, it can be very difficult for them to relearn it the right way. It is always easier to learn something the right way the first time. So take your time and remember, I would say the oldest forest group isn't going to be ready to introduce the months of the year probably until January at the earliest. It's going to take that long for all but one or 90% or better of your class to have these days of the week down. Every now and then, if you get a group that's come up from 3-year-olds and they've really practiced this and they have it, you might get a little bit further, faster. But for the most part, the fall semester is super fast and it has a lot of breaks in it. We have a lot of holidays in the fall that divide up that learning. And once you add in getting ready for your Thanksgiving program, Grandparents' Day, the Christmas program, and all of the things that they need to be learning for those kinds of things, this happens a lot more slowly than you would think. So you want to be sure and hold those months of the year until everybody, every child, individually has a firm hold of those days of the week. And how do you know if they have that firm hold of the days of the week individually? Not that they can say it in group when you're standing here pointing, but that you can call them over on the playground and ask, hey, what are the days of the week? And they can tell you. How do you know?
Testing.
You test them. That's right. And at our school, our setup is that we test on Fridays. If you have a child who only attends on Tuesday, Thursdays, then you're going to need to pull that child on Thursdays and check with them and see how they're doing. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you have a class that includes those part-timers, everything is going to move much more slowly. And particularly if you have Tuesday and Thursday kids. Because the length of time from Thursday all the way to the next Tuesday, that 5 days, it is trying to swim upstream to get them to remember anything. They can remember stuff usually from Tuesday to Thursday, but by the time they have that long weekend in there, it is almost impossible. Before, many years ago, before Tomball College came in and before we had this external influence, our 2-day-a-week children used to attend on Thursday, Friday. And our 3-day-a-week children used to attend on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And that was the way we had it broken up. And that was actually much better because 2 days in a row really gave you a chance to reinforce the learning that went on. But we have this external influence with parents who are either teaching classes in accordance with the schedule at Tomball College, or their parents are taking classes, at which point it became really necessary to start doing those more traditional breakups, Tuesday, Thursdays, and Monday, Wednesday, Friday. But back to this. Once you've gotten to the point that they can say with you, the 7 days of the week are, then you're going to introduce Sunday. And I want to be really, really emphasize how important it is that at this point you stop. You're going to keep doing this with just Sunday introduced for probably at least 2 weeks and maybe longer, because Sunday has that S sound at the beginning of it, but of course it rhymes with Monday. And when you introduce Monday, they're going to forget all about Sunday, and they'll end up saying Monday, Monday, or Sunday, Sunday. They will repeat the same word 2 times, and to hear those differences between Sunday and Monday, it's very subtle. So you want to make sure that at this point you introduce Sunday, you emphasize the S on it, and that you use that as a cue. When you finally get to the point that you're ready to introduce I will tell you that occasionally I have teachers who pronounce Wednesday almost like you're fully pronouncing the middle syllables here. Most of the time that's because when they learned to spell it, they started saying it that way in their head so that they could spell it correctly. It's sort of a hangover or a crutch. But in general, we say Wednesday and we sort of say it like there's wind at the beginning of it instead of, Wednesday, yeah. So we want to try to teach the children the more acceptable, popular pronunciation of these words rather than, and they're not worried about learning to spell yet. You know, if they have to learn to spell it and say Wednesday in their head when they get to spelling it in 3rd or 4th grade, then that'll be fine. They can do that at that point. But right now, we just want them to be able to recognize it when they say it and to recognize it when others say it. And so, you know, locals pronounce it Wednesday, like it starts with wind, and that's okay. Then we get to Thursday, and then like I said, usually Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. You're going to introduce them all individually, but they're not going to have the difficulty that they do with the pronunciation like they do with Sunday and Monday. But once we get down into Friday and Saturday, what happens oftentimes is that by the time you get through with Thursday, other people they want to show off that they know it. They want to show off that they know it. Say the days of the week for me. And they get through with Thursday, which is as far as we've taught. And then when they say them, then everybody else supplies for them Friday, Saturday. And they introduce them as one large lump to the child, and they get to hear it over and over again from parents and grandparents and waitresses and restaurants and whoever else it is that they've decided to show off that they know the days of the week too. Friday, Saturday, Friday, Saturday. And with that, then sometimes it becomes almost like it's a slurred single word, and they don't really get that those are two separate things. So when you're introducing them, you want to be sure that you introduce Friday and talk about that as separate than Saturday. Now with this, then there is a series of questions that we like to teach them to understand. And these are questions you're going to do all through the year. When we start at the beginning of the year, we're going to start as soon as we get to the 7 days of the week and we are saying Sunday, we're going to follow that up with the fact that the first day of the week is Sunday. And what do we do on Sunday? We go to church. Now, of course, we're going to have families that don't go to church at all. We're going to have families that go to church on Saturday nights. We're going to have all of those things. But in general, our normal societal norm is to go to church on Sundays. And when you look at the pictures here, and this is a set of the days of the week that I've made, and it has references of what we do here in school on these days of the week to try to help them to associate the day with an activity. But you'll see that Sunday has a family at church. And Monday we're at school. And Tuesday we have chapel. So there's a chapel picture. And Wednesday, at this point when I made this, we were going to the library on Wednesdays. And then Thursday, these children were having art. So there's a picture of a child doing art. And Friday, we either had pizza or Chick-fil-A. I made it for the kindergartners. And so there's pizza being eaten on Friday. And then Saturday, it was with your family because you get to stay home with your family on Saturday. So these were made specifically to have those kinds of cues for them so our kindergartners could start to associate the day of the week with the rhythm of their actual life. If I were making it for one of your classes, I would move your library to Thursday because I believe that's when you go to library. And I think Wednesday is gardening. So I would put a picture of the children in the garden there for them to have that kind of association with it. But anything like that to help them to understand what is really happening and how this relates to their actual life, of course, makes it much more relevant to them, makes it easier for them to learn. So the questions that we have are included in our group lessons right here. And you can see them, they're there under the day of the week. Today is, and we would talk about it. Today is Monday. Today is Tuesday. Now, if I am only teaching, for example, through Wednesday, I'm going to ask what today is on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Am I going to ask what today is on Thursday or Friday? No, because we haven't introduced those concepts yet. So we don't have to wait till we've introduced all of them. I can just tell them today is Monday, even if that's the only day of the week that we've gotten introduced. As soon as I've introduced Monday, I'm going to start talking about Monday on the day that it's Monday. When I introduce Tuesday, then not only will I talk about what day it is today is Monday, but I would also talk about that tomorrow will be Tuesday. Tomorrow is going to be Tuesday. As soon as I've introduced that word and we've started talking about that day in general, I'm going to start using it. Now, when I get down here to Thursday, if I haven't introduced Thursday and I'm on a Thursday, then I'm not going to ask them what today is, but I'm going to ask them what day was yesterday. Yesterday was Wednesday. I don't have to have introduced today's day of the week or be on that day of the week for them to understand that yesterday was Wednesday. Remember when we talked about the days of the week yesterday? That was Wednesday, wasn't it? And you can say today's Thursday and move on, but you're not going to ask that. You're not going to expect a response. Our goal is that by the time that they have gotten to this point, okay, that they will be able to look at the day of the week that it is. And most of the time you will have to give a visual cue. You will ask them, what day of the week is it? And today is Wednesday, right? Yeah. So you would ask them, what day is today? And you're showing them. Today is Wednesday. What day is today? Wednesday. Yesterday was Tuesday. Yesterday we went to chapel. Today is Wednesday, and tomorrow will be Thursday. Tomorrow we're going to get to have art. Do you see how that helps them to understand that sequence and get that rhythm down? It makes it relevant to them. All right, then yesterday was and tomorrow will be. Those are pretty typical questions that we have there. We have, what do we do? What is the first? Oh, yes, Ms. Pondo.
Sorry, just real quick, because I do this, but now I'm thinking that maybe it's not a good idea. So when I teach my kids the 7 days of the week, we pat on our thighs, and I just do it so they have something to do with their hands, but then is that bad? So that now they have to pat to know the days of the week, or? We do the 7 days with every syllable.
I don't necessarily think it's bad when you're introducing it and when you're learning it, but you definitely want to not do it consistently every single time.
Okay.
So I would say at least once a week or so, you want to tell them, we're going to do the 7 days of the week and we're going to keep our hands still.
Okay.
And, or maybe if you're practicing it more than one time in a row, this time we're going to keep our hands still and we're going to use our quiet voice. Yeah. Or this time we're going to, whatever, put our hands up and do jazz hands or whatever fun, activity you have with it. So I don't think it's a bad idea because it does help them to kind of catch a rhythm and to be involved. And of course, anytime you associate movement with learning, the learning becomes more solid. But what we don't want them to do is to have the movement in order to remember it. Okay. It's like when we teach sounds, when I teach sounds, I almost always have a physical cue that I give them. But I'm going to make sure that we don't always do the physical cue. And when I go to working later on in the year, I may be reminding them of the sound with the physical cue. I want them to associate them together. I want that association to be strong, but I don't want it to be dependent upon each other. And there's a fine line there between the two. So yeah, we want to make sure we're not creating a dependency upon those nonverbal cues. That was a great question, by the way. All right, so then what's the first day of the week is another one of the questions, and we'll talk about that. First is Sunday. That one comes first. What's the last day of the week? And that is Saturday. Now, we do use the traditional American calendar, meaning that our first day of the week is Sunday on our calendars. I know that the European model that starts with Monday as being the first day of the week and putting the weekend together have become more popular. But we do not... We teach this calendar because, and with this, because we tie it back into the Bible. And that Saturday is the day of rest, and that we worship on the Sunday because that was when Christ arose. So we want to be sure that we tie that in and have that in our classrooms. So if you get teaching materials, because sometimes you'll get free teaching materials that have that Monday as a first day of the week, that's fine. You can use that as reference for yourself, but don't use it in your circle area for your monthly calendar.
A lot of the new stuff that's coming out, that's what a lot of it is doing.
I noticed that too.
Yeah,
I was like, why is
singing
this?
songs and little stuff that the kids are watching. It's starting off with Monday.
Yeah, and we don't want to teach that. Again, because we are a Christian school, it affects how and why we do everything. And so from the methods that we use to teach to how we choose what we teach, it's going to affect it. And this is one of those areas where it's definitely, there's a right answer based on that. And when we start talking about creation, we'll talk about the first day of creation was Sunday, and then we'll go through and we'll talk about that Saturday was the seventh day, and that was the day that God rested. And we'll talk about the fact that in the Old Testament that they worshiped on Saturday. And that when Jesus came, when he died on the cross for us, that he created a new covenant. And we, of course, want to introduce that word, the covenant, a promise that God, will not and cannot break. And that part of his new covenant is that we now worship on Sunday to celebrate his resurrection. We want to talk about all those things. Now, are they going to remember that at 4 years old? No. But we'll talk about it at 4, and we'll talk about it in kindergarten, and we'll talk about it in first grade, and we'll talk about it in second grade. And by second grade, usually we have a child who is popping up and telling us, well, we worship on Sunday because of the new covenant. That's amazing. And that's exactly what we want. We want them to understand and to have that as an essential part of their understanding and processing of the world and why it is the way it is. Okay, then first day of the week is Sunday. What do we do on Sunday? We go to church. What's the last day of the week? The last day of the week is Saturday. What do we do on Saturday? My old answer is we stay home and watch cartoons. Now, of course, that is predated. That's back in the day when cartoons were only aired on Saturday morning. You may want to revise that for today's children and say something more along the lines of, we stay home and enjoy our family. That's great. But whatever it is, we don't come to school. We don't come to school on Saturday. All right, when we get to the months of the year, again, we're going to introduce it very, very slowly. And the first thing that we're going to introduce is just that beginning sentence. The 12 months of the year are. And if I were introducing this to my 4-year-olds, I've got to be honest, I would start with just the 12 months. That's all I would say. That would be my first week. We're going to start with our new one, and we're going to talk about the 12 months. Why? Because I want them to know that there are 12 months. And I can tell you right now that I test kids for placement into first grade, third grade, fourth grade, and they have to stop and count the months of the year because they don't know how many there are. And occasionally we get one who's all the way in sixth grade and still can't tell you what the months of the year are. Miss Ford had one in her math class this year who didn't know, in her sixth grade math class, who didn't know the months of the year. And she had to incentivize learning what they were so that he could learn how to count months for story problems. Like if they bought something in July and they sold it in September and it was, $5 more each month. He didn't know how to get from July to September. That's pretty sad. So we want to make sure, like I said, that we go with these foundational bits of knowledge and we go slow enough and then we get a solid amount. If my youngest 4's group doesn't get to the months of the year, they only really know the days of the week, am I going to be disappointed? No. I would always rather have a more sound foundation in those beginning things than I would more knowledge but insecurely learned. And that actually leads me to something I wanted to be sure and say today because I didn't cover it yesterday. And that was that when we talk about learning something, learning is a process. And it's not a do you know this or do you not know this. That's not how it works. That's how we like to think of it, that it works. That when we test a child, they know it or they don't know it, and that's the end of it. And once they know it, and it's good to go. But I'm afraid it's not that black and white. Think about the highest math that you ever took, whether it be calculus in high school or in college, or even if it's just, was algebra 2. Okay, think about the very highest math that you took and passed. I should include that word. Okay, and passed. Did you know it at that point? Yes, because you passed the class. You could not have passed the class if you had not known what you were doing, right? Okay. Could you take that final exam and pass it now? No. Did you really know it then? Yes. Do you really not know it now? Yes. Yeah. It has fallen out of the back of your head to make way for something else, right? Okay. That is a normal part of the learning process. That whole you use it or you lose it, that's completely typical and part of that learning process. Now, the good news is that once you've really known something, even if you've forgotten it, it's often easier to relearn it. But it's not a guarantee. Sometimes it's going to be much more of a struggle to relearn it the second time because you're just old or you don't care. Whether or not you care about whether or not you know something is going to make a big difference in whether or not you can learn it. And sometimes it has to do with what else is going on in your life. If you've gone through some kind of traumatic circumstances or drastic change in your personal life, that's radically going to affect your ability to learn. Whether it be grief or excitement, like new motherhood. I mean, all of those kinds of circumstances can change your ability to learn something new. And it's one of the reasons that we train on this material year after year after year, is that you don't learn it all the first time. And just because you knew it when you walked out the door doesn't mean you still have it a month from now, or 3 months from now, or 5 years from now. And you are not the same person sitting and training today that you were a year ago. There's a whole lot that has changed in your life from that point to this point. And so you are hearing it with a different set of ears and a different set of circumstances. And so as I teach, I'm a different person today than I was a year ago. And as you listen, you're a different person too. And I mean, the way that I prepare for training in general is that I go watch back and I watch videotapes of my mother and my aunt teaching from the 80s. And I have training tapes that date from the late 70s all the way up through 89 or 90. That's the most recent training tapes I have. And they're VHS tapes and they're in very poor shape. It's getting harder and harder to find machines that will play them as the tapes get older and the machines get older and all. In fact, at this point, it's almost impossible to get some of them to play. But I watch those same tapes year after year after year. You would think at this point I would have them memorized, right? And some of them I do. I can tell you what she's going to say or do next word for word in that video. But every time I hear it, I learn something new. I learn something different. And we're recording this year our training. And I can tell you right now that some of you may end up watching these trainings again and again and again. And every time you hear it, you're going to hear it differently. You're going to learn something new. You're going to be like, I didn't catch that before, but that's really important, or that's a subtle difference, or so on and so forth. All of those things are going to happen. Even though you were here experiencing it live, watching it again, you'll get something different. And so there's a reason that the state requires in-person training year after year, but there's also a reason that step-by-step requires way more than the minimum training. And especially curriculum training is something that's not required by anything external, but we require it internally because it does make a difference. And we need that refresher. We need that refocus. We need this time together, whether it be, by camera or in person. And I'm going to tell you right now, in person is always better. And I apologize to those who are just getting it via recording. Okay, so back to what before I move on. Insecure knowledge is that knowledge that you can access when the circumstances are right. It's that where you feel like you're pulling it out of a hat, Oftentimes insecure knowledge for me involves people's names. If the circumstances are just right, I can remember somebody's name. If I see them in the right place at the right time and I'm not really focused on something else, I can pull that name out and say, oh, hi, Mrs. Parker, whatever. If the circumstances are wrong or I'm distracted, names are going to fall out of the back of my head. And I will forget the names of people that are like my family. and I'll be sitting there and I'll be, you. Because that's just not something that is easily and readily accessible to me. It's a difficulty for me. Other people have no problem with names, but recognizing faces is difficult. Actually, recognizing faces isn't a strong suit for me either. Once you're about after about age 12, it gets really, really, really iffy if I'm going to remember you. But that's okay. And sometimes it may be that I'm going to call you Miss Eagles or Miss Busy Bee or whatever. And sometimes it's going to be that I'm going to call you something that you taught like 5 classes back. And that's going to be okay. Because it's not a reflection of my esteem or value of you. It's just a reflection that is insecure knowledge for me. It's hard for me to grasp that. With our kiddos, sometimes this is when sometimes they can get that that's red and sometimes they can't. Sometimes they can tell you that that's blue and sometimes they can't. Sometimes that word comes to their mouth easily and sometimes it's not there. To to move from insecure knowledge to secure knowledge, where it's just part of what you know and that you have accessible all the time, what do you have to do? So the 12 months of the year, January, February, March, April, usually you'll introduce those, and you want to, of course, take your time. And most of the time, we remember to take our time at those points as we're teaching those. We're still patient, it's still new, and we don't have that rush. Usually by the time we're getting to March and April and May, well, then we're getting a little more impatient with it, and we may go a little bit too fast. June and July, oftentimes this is very hard. The kids get them too quickly and they start mixing them up. So be very careful there. But by the time we're getting into the last 4 months of the year, September, October, November, and December, these are absolutely when we go too fast. Over and over and over again, we have problems with this. And when we test kids to go into kindergarten, they will say over and over and over again, umber. They do not know those last 4 months. So when you introduce September, then you're going to say September and not move on for at least 2 weeks. And when you add September and then October, you're going to say just those two for a month. Now, thinking about that, if you're just introducing September and October and you're not adding anything else for at least a month, and we're not starting until at the earliest January, are you going to make it through the 12 months of the year? No, probably not. And that is perfectly fine. Now, kinder will get all the way through all 12 months. They will learn all of them. And that's fine. That's when that's appropriate. And in first grade, we will start introducing not only will we practice the months of the year, because we still have to practice it in first grade, we'll start introducing the numbering of them. That January is month number 1, and so on and so forth. But I can tell you right now, we introduce that in kindergarten. We don't really expect them to be responsible for it, to know that 5-5 means May 5th, until they're in 6th or 7th grade. It takes them that long to really get this down and to associate the numbers with it. It's a very, very, very slow process in order to truly incorporate it. And I can tell you right now that if you have a background in accounting or in business management, you can probably tell me what the end of the quarters of the year are off the top of your head. Like you know that like the back of your hand because you live by quarters. You know, that idea of the first quarter of the year ends here and the second quarter of the year ends there. But if you've never been in that environment, guess what? It's not going to come to you readily. If you are in a school environment, you can tell me when each of our primary, trimesters begins, right? We've got mid-August, around August 15th, right? We've got after Christmas, and then we've got June 1st, and that's, give or take a week, going to be how our entire life flows, those 3 terms, right? The fall, the spring, and then, of course, summer is completely separate. And so to us, those rhythms become natural, just like an accountant, the quarters become natural. But for the kids, none of it is natural. They can't remember a month ago, And so this idea of the months of the year, it's very difficult. And of course, it's abstract completely. They don't understand that concept. What they understand about time is that their birthday is soon. It doesn't matter if they had a birthday yesterday. They're going to be 5 on their next birthday. And that's what they get. That's all they get. And that whenever their birthday is, it cannot possibly be soon enough. All right. Moving on from the months of the year and the days of the week. The next thing that we have here is talking about counting. And I am going to go ahead and discuss counting right now. We will get more into the idea of counting as we talk about the math shelf and how we teach math overall. But we're going to talk about rote counting in relationship to the classroom. And if you look up here, you will see that I have two different, well, actually, I have multiple charts here to teach counting from. And we're going to talk about the pluses and minuses of each of them. There we go. All right. So we have, the first one that we have here is a commercially available chart. And it's published by, this one's Creative Teaching Press, but Carson DeLosa makes them, and anybody else you can think of that does them. They have these commercially available charts, and they almost always start with 1, and they go to 100, and they make a nice, neat little block, and the entire thing is shown at one time. And there may be times and circumstances where this is going to be the best chart for your classroom, when you will use this, and we want to expose them to it. But it's not the chart you should start the year with, and it's certainly not the only chart that you should have. And there are several reasons for that. The next one that you can see here is one that I have made that we've printed here at Step by Step. And this one has been specifically made for our teaching purposes. And what you'll see is that each and every one of these 10s is a separate strip and has been put onto this board as we taught them. Yes, completely separately. Now, this is just like when we were covering up the days of the week that we're not to yet. We're not putting out more than what it is. Why is that? Well, because if I'm asking the child to look here at this number and we're counting to 15, there is a whole lot of distraction that's involved there, you know, and it can be very visually confusing for them. It's also, you're going to have kids who are further than we are, right? And when it's there, they want to say it. So we don't want to put more out than what we actually need to have out, which means that a chart like this, where we start off with just 0 and we go all the way through 9 and we stop there, that's an excellent chart. Now, why is it that we have our charts start with 0? Well, there's a number of reasons, but the biggest reason that we want to introduce this is that there are no 10s. When we start teaching place value in kindergarten, which is when we start teaching place value, they're used to seeing this. They're used to this concept of 0 means none. It means there's nothing there. That concept isn't all of a sudden something that's been introduced that shakes their entire world. It's just taken for granted because it's part of what they've been exposed to. Now, when we count, do we have to say 0? No, we tell them we're going to count from 1 to 4, 1 to 5, whatever. And we start 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When we put our number lines up, and you'll see here that there is a number line up here, and this number line that is up in this classroom is actually, if you look at it, you'll see that it includes negative numbers. And the reason for that is that in this classroom, we use this number line with occasionally 6th grade math when we start teaching negative numbers. And so they need a number line, even at that age, to understand and begin to understand how to subtract negative numbers, to add negative numbers. They may have to literally look at the number line and move up or down the number line to do the addition and subtraction problems. They have to rely on it again. We go back to depending on it again. Even though they're 12, we need a number line. But in our classrooms, would we put up the number line and have it have these negative numbers visible? Oh no, that's going to be entirely too confusing for them. When you put up your number line, it may very well start with 1, or sometimes it starts with 0. I personally like them better when they start with 0. Do I start counting on 0? Nope, I don't have to. I can talk about it at some point in time that 0 means there's nothing there. But do we have to talk about it? Do we have to say it to begin with? No. We don't even need to talk about it. We're just going to start counting at 1, and I'm going to point to 1 when I count. The same thing here. The 0 is there, but I'm going to start at 1, and we're going to count by ones. Now, when you look at it in this way, okay, if you look at these numbers, 0 to 9, where does it look like the 10 belongs? Does it belong with these digits here? No, the 10s belong with the teens, right? 20 belongs with the 20s. They're all linked together. When you get to 30, you're in your 30s, okay? When you look at this one, where does 10 look like it belongs? With the ones. When you look at this one, where does 20 look like it belongs? With the teens. And 40 looks like it belongs with the 30s. Now, I know that there are a lot of women out there who would like to believe that 40 is still in your 30s. But common sense tells us that's not true, is it? 40 is the beginning of the 40s. And so our number lines are set up to reflect that because, in all honesty, that's the truth. Now, I have had in some of the 3-year-old years, I've had them fold this 0 under so it doesn't show to begin with. And then later on in the year when they start to talk about what nothing means, that there's nothing there, there's nothing left, we've used it all, then they introduce the idea of 0 and unfold it so that we can show that before 1 there's nothing. Okay? And that's perfectly fine. It's actually a really good way to introduce the idea of 0, but we don't need to start the year with 0. All right, and so here, as we do it, we are going to put our finger on the number and say the numbers out loud. And we're going to say them without that cadence or that rhythm in our voice that indicates when we're going to end it. If I told you we were going to count to 3 and I said 1, 2, 3, you would feel like 3 was the end of it, right? And it sounds like it's the end of it for good. Like you're never going to go on again. There's nothing that could come after that because that's the end of the song, right? If I say we're going to count to 3 and I say 1, 2, 3, it sounds like I'm stopping partway through it. Of course, one of the things that we want to introduce children to eventually is the idea that numbers are infinite. They go on and they go on and they go on. But getting to that concept to where the pattern can continue and you can continue to count forever, okay, it's a very slow, gradual concept. Some kids are ready for that earlier than others. Occasionally we have 4-year-olds who get that concept and they can count and count and count. And they could tell you like what comes after 764, and they could tell you 765. What number comes after 1,247? Well, they get the idea that there's a rhythm, so they would know it would be, all the beginning would be the same, 1,248. They would be able to do that. They might not be able to tell you what comes after 1,299. They might not be able to switch it to 1,300, or they might not be able to tell you what comes after 1,999. They might not get to go to 2,000 because those are harder. But still, they get that idea of the rhythm of counting and that you're going to replace it. No, not all 4-year-olds are ready for that. They're few and far between that are. But in kindergarten, do we expect them to be able to do that? Yeah, absolutely. We want them to be able to tell us what number comes next up to 20,000. And they can do it. We consistently teach that. And that's a 5-year-old. Pretty impressive when you think about it, right? But their brains have gotten the idea and they're ready to understand that patterning of the way that numbers work, and they can keep going and keep going. And in first grade, when we start to introduce past thousands into 10,000s and 100,000s, they can do it. And that's because they have that native understanding of the patterning and of place value. And it starts with you guys, and it starts with this concept that once we're in the 10s, we're in the teens. Once we're in the start with 30, we're in the 30s. And so this is why we like this chart. And it's something that we have to make because it's not something that's commercially available. This is not at all trendy. This is what you see, but this is better. All right, and then the last one here you can see is a chart that is completely intact. And this one was made for kindergarten, I think, in particular.
Yes.
And it is all one big piece. She can show it and have it up, and it goes all the way to, and you can see right here that 100 starts a whole new group of 10s. See that? Now, if we really were going to be specific, it would be really nice if our 100 started a whole new place value and was even off in a different location to signify that. But we do get the idea here that 100 is not one of the 90s. And so this is why we use the counting charts that we do. And when we count with these charts, we are going to vary between which chart we use, whether we count on this kind of a chart or we count on a number line. We're going to vary back and forth between them because we want them to understand not only can you wrap this way, but our numbers are growing bigger as we're going down the line. Both concepts are good for them. That left to right, top to bottom orientation, what does that prepare them for? Absolutely. It's exactly how we read. They need to know that we get to the end and we wrap around and we start with the next line. That's great practice for reading. But they also need to understand this linear concept that the further we go down that number line, the bigger the numbers are getting. So using both is important, and you need to have both up for your circle board. And these are concepts in general that I teach from the wall. Most of what goes on a circle board is not what you're going to teach from. Almost everything that you teach from is going to end up being in a little letter carrier just like this on your teaching shelf. And they're going to be flashcards that you hold up and that you're dealing with in your hands. That's going to be 90% of what you teach. But numbers and counting is going to be one of the few that needs to be up on the wall. Days of the week, months of the year, numbers and counting. Yeah, that's about all I do on the wall, I think. Yeah, I think that's everything. So we do want to make sure, as I said, that we have those. Now, the other thing I will tell you is that as much as the number line at the top of the wall is good for a group learning time, sometimes it can be very good to have a smaller version of your number line at the height that the children can go and they can touch and count. And we have some of these available. You can have them on their tables at their desks. You can have it on the wall. You can have a pretend classroom where the children can have their own circle time and they can practice being the teacher. All of that practice where they get to play and be the teacher, that is all huge in helping to cement that learning and that knowledge. And that's one of the things that helps move it from that insecure knowledge to that secure knowledge. In Girl Scouts, and I was a Girl Scout leader for probably, 20 years or so. But in Girl Scouts, in the different levels, we have different expectations. So in Daisies, they're just simply introduced to the abstract concepts of character building. But in Brownies, the badges are called try-its, and the whole goal is to try something. But once you're getting into the older groups, the cadets, and so on and so forth, the idea is that you're going to take those activities that you tried when you were a Brownie and you're going to get so proficient in them, you can teach somebody else about them. You really want to become good at something? Put yourself in a position that you're responsible for teaching it. You're going to know it backwards and forwards. And so when the children play school, when they're teaching their stuffed animals or their classmates, guess what they're doing? They're becoming proficient in that knowledge. That's exactly right. And it's why it's so heartening to see Cody teaching his horses to say the Lord's Prayer, is that he's got that knowledge securely in there, and is ready to go with it. All right. So when we start learning to count, we're going to start with learning to count by ones. And depending on the age of the group, that will dictate how fast we go. With our youngest kids, we'll start with 1 and then add 1 and 2 and then add 3. Really and truly, I'm okay with you starting with 1, 2. 1, 2. I'm okay with that with the toddlers, just so that they get the idea of, because they're not looking, they're not focusing, they don't know what you're talking about. It takes them a little while to get some sort of general rough idea of, oh, she's pointing, her hand is someplace. That's a really subtle thing for a toddler to grasp. So it's okay if you go ahead and start with 1 and 2 for toddlers. The 2-year-olds, we usually go to 3 to begin with. And then we're going to add the numbers individually after that. 1, 2, 3, and then we'll stop. But we're going to make sure that we're not doing the 3. Okay, we want to make sure that our voice keeps that intonation, that this is a pattern that's going to continue, that there's more that's going to happen. And as you add those numbers individually, you're going to need to hang out, as I put it, to stop and practice that number for a very long time. Now when you look at what our expectations are for the year, okay, and where we are happiest, what we think is normal for a class to achieve, we expect our 4-year-olds, we promise our parents, so to speak, that they will be able to count to 40. That's our goal, okay? Now, can our kids count past 40? Yeah, absolutely. We have the oldest 4-year-old classes sometimes get to where every child in the class can count to 100. I mean, that's amazing, you know? And you're going to look at it with the idea that that's possible. And we're going to keep going when they're ready for more. But we let the children dictate that, not our own boredom. And most of the time, our boredom, we're ready to move on. They're not. And that's what causes us to push, is that we think they should be ready. Well, guess what? We don't have the pretend children that are in your brain. We have the actual children. And how do we know when our kids can count? What are we doing? We're testing. Are we testing them in a group?
No.
Nope. Are we testing them where they can hear each other? No. We really need to be calling them over individually to do that. And as I said before, our testing day at Step by Step is typically Fridays. We'll call the kids over and have them go over what it is that they know. Yes?
What's the goal for oldest 3s? What should they be able to count to?
If my oldest 3s can count to 20, like the whole class can count to 20, I'm super duper happy. Okay. Those teens are incredibly hard. Most of the time, if you get to 15, but they really can tell you 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and they can really say all of those words, I'm thrilled. If my 4-year-old teachers, if all of their kids walked in and they could tell us to 15, they could really count to 15 and articulate those words, would you guys be happy with that? If your kids walked in day 1 and knew that? Absolutely. Right. Okay. So, those teens are incredibly difficult. Yeah. When we talk about number recognition, we'll get into this a little more. But the hardest numbers for the children to keep track and to understand, 12, 21, and 20. Keeping these 3 numbers separated and knowing what they are the most difficult. In kindergarten, they're still getting this mixed up. Sometimes in 1st grade, they can't tell me the difference between 12, 21, and 20. They can't read a number and tell me which one it is. Okay? This is incredibly difficult. These reversals, and then with the 10s, for whatever reason, that's very, very, very hard. And so the more time that we take and the better solidified, especially these early teens are, the better that we are.
We made it to 20, but I thought we were behind. So that's why I was questioning it.
Nope. You were as far as I would really want you to be. Okay. Yeah. You may have a group that's ready for more, but when you had a year where you got kids in and you got kids out, and anytime you have that kind of in and out, it's going to alter the entire group.
Yeah, I definitely had my 5 kids that could have easily counted to 40, but I also had my very young kids that really needed me to stay with them a little bit longer. So.
Right. And sometimes with those, if you have a few 5 that are ready for more, when we're on the playground, I might call them over and, play a game where we counted higher than 20. Yeah. Because they are ready for it and they're ready to hear it. But your other 10 are so not ready to hear it. And even being exposed to them does not enrich them, it confuses them. And so when we enrich past what the group is ready for, it really needs to be done in a small group setting where you're not throwing it out there for everybody, to get confused on. Okay. there are parts of teaching that are a science, that are clearly laid out, that go, in this order and they happen in this way. But there are parts of it that are more of an art form that you have to kind of feel and sort of intuit your way through. And this is one of those areas where you definitely are going to have to depend more on that intuition. And if you're going too fast, like if they weren't really ready for, if you got one in the group that really wasn't ready to count past 20, it'll become obvious very quickly that you should,
Because we tried 25 one day and I was like, never mind, we're going back. it was bad.
Yeah. And at that age, you have to think too. These are completely alien concepts. Every bit of the language is new, right? And when children learn to count, on tours, I often talk to parents about counting, and I'll talk to them about, I'll make reference to that song, ooh, ee, ooh, ah, ah, ting, tang, walla, walla, bing, bang. It doesn't mean anything. It's just a sequence of sounds, right? We know the rhythm because we know the words, the sounds, because, of course, we put it to music. Ooh, ee, ooh, ah, ah, ting, tang, walla, walla, bing, bang, right? We know that. It's in there. It's in our head in one big lump sum. Oftentimes, when kids learn to count, especially if it's like from Sesame Street, where they've learned to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay. At that point, it's just a sequence of sounds. It doesn't have any more meaning than that ooh, ee, ooh, ah, right? And getting them to like start in the middle and then stop partway through to say ooh, ah, ah, ting. Okay, that is almost impossible. But when we go to subtraction, when we start teaching the quantity like that, guess what? That's exactly what we're asking them to do. It's to start in the middle of the rhythm and then stop somewhere in the middle of it. That is impossible. Y'all ever seen Who Framed Roger Rabbit?
Yes.
And you remember with the, right? And he talk about how the he's looking for Roger Rabbit and he's hidden in the closet. And he's like, tunes can't resist it, and he goes through and he's, yeah. And Roger has to burst out and say, 2 bits, right? He can't help himself, right? When we have it by rhythm only, that's exactly what it is. We feel the need to finish it. We can't, because it's a whole, right? It makes it complete. We don't want counting to become dependent upon that kind of rhythm like that. And so we want to make sure as we're doing it that we introduce them one number at a time, that we make sure that we don't have that kind of rhythm to it, that we clearly articulate it, and that we don't have our voice do that kind of 1, 2, 3, where it ends. These are very important aspects of counting. All right, and when we are teaching it, we're going to teach it by teaching them to follow our finger. They cannot say the name of that number until I point to it, or to follow your pointer. And so as I'm doing it, I'm going to vary my speed. I'm going to vary my rhythm. I'm going to pause awkwardly. I'm going to do all of those things to trip them up. Why? Because I'm trying to help them understand the idea of quantity. That number represents that word, and that we stop at certain points along it. We can start anywhere and we can stop anywhere. So at first we'll practice just counting. 1, 2, 3. We're going all the way to 6, 4, 5, 6. All right, and we'll stop there, right? Okay. And I may talk to them about, we're going to start counting at 4 and stop counting at 6. Okay? 4, 5, 6. Guess what we've just done? We've taught them how to add. Right? We start with 4 and we go to 6. Okay? That's what you're doing there. You're getting them the idea of quantity. Are we going to explain to them that we started with 4 and we added 2 to get to 6? No. No, that they don't need all that. They don't need all that language. But this idea of starting in the middle of that sequence of numbers and going from there to a designated set spot, okay, that's going to feed right into addition and subtraction. It's that idea of quantity. That one-to-one correspondence, it's all in there. And so practicing counting with your kids 3 times a day. You need to practice with the and do this with them 3 times every circle in a row without fail. Now you can do more than that because some days, let's face it, you're kind of filling time. Okay. Some days we have too much time and not enough new material to introduce. On those days, if you're waiting for snack to be delivered, right? It's running late, or it's almost time to go to picture day, but not quite time, and we've got a few extra minutes. You might get in 5, 6, 7 practices on counting. That's great. There's nothing wrong with that, right? You might get in extra practice when you're lining up to go outside. You might get extra practice when you're coming in from outside. You might get extra practice when you're waiting for the bathrooms to be cleared. That's excellent. More practice is always better. But in your circle time, when you're counting, you want to count at least 3 times. And how do you keep their attention for that?
Change it.
You have to change it. That's exactly right. You might want to whisper. You might want to adopt your cowboy voice. You might want to do a little mermaid voice. You might want to have your kid voice where you're loud. You might want to have your librarian voice where you whisper with your finger in front of your mouth. That's actually really good to practice how to talk in the library too. And they can talk really loud with their finger in front of their mouth whispering. And that's okay. Okay? These are all great ways to practice. Sometimes you're going to practice where you are doing like head, shoulders, knees and toes. Do that as you count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. That immediately becomes fun. And guess what? Because you're moving while you're doing it, it makes it harder to think about. Okay? It's incorporating 2 parts of their brain at the same time. When you go outside and you're playing, okay, if you've been practicing playing catching, learning to catch, which is a physical skill that you need to practice with, and we'll talk about that hopefully when we do physical skill training. One of the things that I really like to make up is a ball of newspaper, and then you wrap like blue tape around it, and then your final layer of blue tape has the sticky side out, so that the ball is sticky all the way around. For your children who are like me and who have 0 body IQ and body awareness and have never caught anything that's been thrown at them in their entire lives, this idea that if they just get hit by the ball, that it attaches itself to them, they can catch, that's miraculous. Well, guess what? When we're outside and we're throwing the ball, okay, that's great. They can count with that. 2 things all at once. Makes it really, really, really cement home how it does. And so as you're practicing counting, as I said, you're going to start off with 1 to 3, okay? And in the 4-year-old year, you're going to go to 6 pretty quickly. You're going to take a long time and hang out with 7, 8, and 9. And then you'll add 10 pretty quickly. This is rote counting. Now, that is not the same as number recognition. That is a completely separate process, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But once your entire class, meaning 90% or better, all but one child, can count to 40, then you're going to introduce the idea of counting by tens. And when we introduce the idea of counting by tens, the first thing that we want to do, oh, look, here's another number line. See, this one is like one from a classroom. And it has the 0 there, and I would leave that 0 there. And not only would I put this up in my classroom, I would cover the part that we're not counting to yet. So I would put this number line up, and then I would cover as what we're not doing. And usually the cover that I use is probably part of the number line that's not being used right now. And I just, because it's all laminated, I ticky-tack it, and I can just move it down pretty easily when I'm ready to introduce more. So you can see there. Now, of course, this number line is really handy because it's going to introduce the idea of odd numbers and even numbers. Now, is that something that we're worried about in preschool? No. But you'll have some kids that notice that. And that is kind of, and when they get to the point in 1st grade that they're introduced to that concept, or they're counting by 2s, they're going to get very excited. Okay, so when you first introduce the idea of counting by tens, you're going to take your tens. Here we go. chart. And when you show it to them, you're going to show it to them with the zeros covered. And you're going to show them the fact that it counts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. See how it shows that? See how it counts to 10? Now look right here. Look what happens when I do this. And they're going to be like, whoa! It's going to blow their mind. It really is. And then I'm going to show them how this counting by tens matches this column right here exactly. And I'm going to show them those similarities. Thank you. At that point, when I have taught them that this is going to go in that 1 to 10 order, and that this then we will go on and add 30. And you're going to add each one of these individually. And it'll probably be 3 or 4 days, sometimes a week between introductions. But it's really hard for them to hear and to say the difference between 30 and 40. For whatever reason, those two get really muddled. And so you don't want to move on from 30 to 40 until they have a really good handle on saying 30. Because what they end up saying is 30, 31, 32. Well, guess what? Then they say 30 for the 30s, and then they say 30 again for the 40s. And guess what? Then they have no idea about concept of quantity because you said those 30s or 40s twice. Well, then you need to say the 50s twice, right? And the 60s twice. It ruins the whole patterning of it. So when we are teaching 30 and 40, we want to be sure that we pause long enough between those that we teach those words. And the same thing here, when we get to 39 and we're about to introduce the term 40, if we can't say the word 30, we're not ready to learn the word 40, right? So we've got to make sure that we really articulate and learn those differences because that 30, that catches up to us. All right. Once you can count all the way to 100 by tens, that would be when you introduce counting by fives. Lots of years, nobody gets to counting by fives. That's not at all a preschool thing. Doesn't even happen in preschool. And that's okay. If it doesn't happen in preschool, we are perfectly fine with that. But if you do happen to have a group that for whatever reason they're strong counters and you're ready to learn to count by fives, I'm going to go ahead and talk about that for just a few minutes. All right, this is my counting by fives chart. And again, this is one that I have made. And when I put this chart up on the wall to begin with, I would want to cover the part that we're not using. So you can see here, I flipped that chart by tens over, so I am just showing the first half of this. And we're not even going to introduce the second half to get to 100 for a long time. So I would not only cover that part, I would cover from here down. When you start counting by fives, okay, one of the big things is that every other number is going to be a 5, right? And so if we've talked about patterning and if we've taught patterning, okay, then I introduced the idea of counting by fives. I'm having weight issues. Sorry. Okay, there we go. All right, I introduce it by putting the pattern on the wall, on the board. All right. I've made a pattern. Okay, now this is of course a pattern. We've talked about patterning before. We've patterned with colors. We've patterned whatever. By the time we're at this point in the year, we've been patterning all year, right? Okay, because this is going to be probably April for an old 4-year-old group. Okay, and I'm going to put these 5s and these 0s on the board just like this. And then I'm going to talk about the fact that I made a pattern. And my pattern is 5, 0, 5, 0, 5. What's going to come next in my pattern? 0. They're going to know, right? Okay, now look at that. Can we keep going with my pattern? Yeah, we could. We could keep going all the way down the board. We could put 5 and 0 and 5 and 0. We could keep going with that pattern until we filled up all the walls with 5s and 0s, right? Because we know the pattern. Okay, now guess what? When we know this pattern, it makes it super easy for us to count our new way. You know why? Because it helps us to know how to count by 5s. If we're going to count by 5s, we're going to have a 5, and then we're going to put a 1 right here, and then we have 5, 10. And we put a 1 right here, and that makes it 15. Look, now I'm going to put a 2 and a 2. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. You know what? We could count by 5s forever because we know the pattern. We just put the 1s, and then we put 2 2s. What are we going to put next? We're going to put 2 3s. That's right. What would we put next? We would put 2 4s. That's right. And guess what? That would teach us how that pattern goes forever. Could we fill the whole room with it? We could. We could just keep counting and keep counting, couldn't we? But right now, we're just going to learn to say the first part of our pattern, and that's going to be 5, 10, 15, 20. All right, let's look at it over here. You can see that I've got it already up here on our new chart. Let's look at it and let's say it together. 5, 10, 15, 20. Now look, if we look at just the last numbers, can we see our pattern? 5, 0, 5, 0. Do you see our pattern? I see our pattern right there, don't you? Let's look at it again. 5, 0, 5, 0. Is that the same as our pattern over there? It is. Okay, so it's going to be 5, 10, 15, 20. Now, after I've been introducing this, and we've done it this way, and we've done it this way, because I would introduce this idea of the pattern in the 5, 0, I would do it again the next day. Shorter, but I would do it again. They're not going to think it's magic the next day. But I would do it again the third day. Shorter, but again, introduce it that way. Okay, after I've done that for a while, then I'm going to introduce them to the concept of the pattern on here. We go from the middle to the beginning, middle to the beginning, middle to the beginning. And we would start talking about how to count by 5s using a chart like this. Now, this is much more complicated because what they want to do is 5, 15, 25. They want to do all those 5s right down the middle. Okay? So it's much more complicated. But are we going to introduce them to the idea that we could use this chart? Yes. Okay? But we will start it here once they can really say this over here. Once they can count to 20 for you, then you'll show them how that you can get to it on this chart. Okay? And sometimes your number lines have the 5s and the 10s in another color. Instead of it being odds and evens like this one is, sometimes the 5s and the 0s will be in red and all the other numbers will be different colors. And those are, easier to show that number line by. It just depends on what's trendy in education this week. The materials that are available, like things that used to be commonly available that you can't find anymore, or the things that they have now that, are different, it really does boggle the mind. Education is very trendy. There's a lot of, and sometimes it's good. Sometimes that change in things is good. Oftentimes, something becomes popular without any actual proof that it works, and that's frustrating for me. And then the last chart that I have here to show you is the count by 2s. And in kindergarten, we learn to count by 2s. And we start it, and they learn to count by 2s to 12. And And once they can count by twos reliably to 12, then we teach them the little rhythm, the 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. I've had teachers in the past who taught that rhythm instead of teaching them how to actually count by twos. And of course, then they can't really count by twos. But in the 4-year-old year, the chances of you learning to count by fives all the way to 100 and getting to count by twos, not going to happen. But we do teach it into the 2-year-old year. Into the kindergarten year. And then, of course, in first grade, we spend a lot of time skip counting. And they'll learn to skip count by, of course, they should know 10s and 5s when they get there, but we will reteach those just in case. And then we'll teach 2s as well. After that, then we will move on and we will start learning to skip count by 25s so that they can count quarters. And then from there, then we'll start adding counting by 3s. They will learn to count by 12s so that they can learn how to count dozens. They'll learn to count 6s because once you can count by dozens, then adding in the 6s isn't too terribly difficult.
Is that the step-by-step sign?
Yeah, and I'm talking about first grade. I think they learn to count by 4s also.
Probably just from getting ready for multiplication.
But one of the big things about skip counting is that it prepares you for arrays and then, of course, for multiplication. And so learning to do that skip counting is very important. It's something that they practice in first grade every day. And they practice counting every single day, just the way that preschoolers do. Now, they may practice counting from 339 to 351 instead of counting from 39 to 51. But again, they still need that practice. They still need to say it every single day. And so they do. And that continues, like I said, all the way through first grade, all the way through second grade. I think they're still counting out loud all the way through fourth grade. But they're counting different patterns. Yes?
When would you start introducing counting backwards?
In the 4-year-old year, definitely.
I think it was either January or February. We starting 10 to 1, and then I think by maybe April I was up to 15, but didn't go any further.
We should probably start earlier because counting backwards gets them prepared for subtraction. And by January they should be.
Yeah, I started.
Okay, I probably did.
Yeah, I'm thinking that once your group is counting like to 15, that you should introduce the idea of counting maybe even at 10. Start counting backwards, saying the numbers backwards, and just introduce it on the board going backwards. That, hey, you know, we get bigger when we go this way, we can get smaller when we go this way. What's this number? And saying it and practicing it. I definitely think that it's... I would say, yeah, when we're oral counting maybe to 10, that we should start introducing counting backwards. When everybody can count to 10. But at the same time, I also want to really emphasize that it's better for them to be able to count and say what number comes before and get only to 10 and counting backwards. That really, really knowing how to count to 10, from 10 backwards, what number comes before, is way more important than how far you get. So I would be much more, you know, happy with the counting. I mean, 15 is way far enough. They're not going to need to go above that. But practicing it and keeping it over and over again, and even playing games where you know, I'm going to say a number and you tell me what comes before. What comes before 7?
6.
What comes before 5? What comes before 8?
7.
What comes before 9?
8.
What comes before 6?
5.
Right, okay. When we're doing that, what we're doing is taking away 1, right? We're learning take away 1s. That immediate knowledge of what comes before, that is take away 1s. And so practicing that skill to 10 and playing those kinds of games is going to be more important than going further with it. they'll get the concept of going further and counting backwards pretty organically.
I don't think I ever went past 10.
I think I went to 12. I'm trying to think. I think maybe I did go to 12.
Because what I find is that when you really master the 10, it's almost like they consciously get the rest. Yeah, they really get the whole like concept of the back.
Once they get the idea, start to get the idea of the repetition of numbers. Yes, sir.
I was thinking that to help learn that concept of, like, or going along the lines of the game, saying, you know, maybe mommy was being generous and gave you 10 cookies one night because you were really good. You ate one cookie. What's the
How many are left?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, camera.
Absolutely. And what Nathan has just introduced is our introduction to subtraction. It's exactly how we teach subtraction, is we start with that oral concept. And of course, we'll get more into that when we're specifically focusing on math, but he is absolutely right that becomes the natural and organic evolution of what we're doing. That idea of story problems. I had 5 balloons and 1 popped. How many do I have left? I had 9 cookies and Daddy ate 1. How many do I have left? That's going to be the natural outgrowth of where we're going with that. Okay. After we've talked about rote counting by ones, we've talked about counting by 10s and by 5s. After we talk about rote counting, the next thing that we really need to talk about is touching and counting. And touching and counting involves not touching the numbers on the rote counting board, but instead it is a quantitative counting of objects.